Good to see you all. Genuinely so honored to have you here, starting 2025 strong with us. You're one for one, all right? You're beating out a lot of other people. How many of you are honestly just like, you know what? 2026 is my year. Because you know the past 4 days are just a wash, right? Still carrying a little bit of the holiday love and waiting, all that good stuff. If we haven't met, my name's Pete. I'm one of the youth pastors here. And one of the very, very fun, selfish lines that I get to live in, it's a fine line, is the line between being cringy and relatable to youth, right? I gotta be young enough to be relatable to them, but old enough to where they actually respect me and I'm not like their best friend. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to include you in some of my pain or perspective when it comes to the lingo of youth today, okay? So parents, if you genuinely just want to embarrass your kids for 2025, this is my late Christmas present to you, okay? I'm gonna start off with just one obvious front runner lingo winner. This is gonna be in Webster's before you know it. This word is Riz. Raise your hand if you've heard of Riz. Yeah? All right, now I will say Brian has claimed to own this phenomenon, even though it is self-diagnosed. I 100% guarantee that because it stands for charisma. But when it comes to Riz, students don't just settle for saying they have Riz. They have leveled up their expression of what it means by calling themselves the Rizzler of Oz, a big old Rizzly bear, or claiming to be a Rizosaurus Rex, which I think is ridiculous. But I'm so sorry. But some teens genuinely have claimed to have PhDs in quantum physics, which is just so stupid. But they've also gotten a master's in Rizonomics. So to be relatable to youth, Olivia and I, this past February, I always like to do a relationship series in February. You know, young love, puppy love. We love to smash that with the reality of what the world is like. So I did a series, or we did a series called Rizzle Me This, right? Where relationships aren't meant to be like riddles. And God's relationship with you is straightforward. Pretty good, right? I thought it was pretty good. But I want to give you basically a list of ammunition to give towards kids. And I just want you to envision yourself. If you have kids, you're dropping them off, you are just going to yell this terminology out the door as they're walking to their friends so that their friends can literally turn their backs and walk away from them like they're walking away from you, okay? First, we have the phrase ate, left no crumbs, okay? This means that you did really, really good at something. I don't get this a lot. We have selling, which means lame. I do get this a lot. We have sigma, lone alpha male. We have pick me energy, trying hard. We have slay, speaks for itself. We have lore, which is sort of like a backstory. We have sus or suspicious, high key, obvious, low key, not as obvious. Bet means for sure. Cap, you lie. No cap, telling the truth. And then 2 honorable mentions. I don't want to say the next one. Can we just put it up there? Zaddy, okay? You'll have to ask Brian a little bit about this. And then the world will never know what the last one means. Do we have it? Skibbity toilet Ohio Riz, okay? That is like if you have set up your kids, hey kid, or how many of you just call your kid kid? It's safe to do because you don't remember their name. We all know it, it's fine. But say you hope they have W Riz and they have something, and then if you just want to hit them with a final punch, just scream out skibbity toilet Ohio Riz as they're going to their friend group, and their friend group will be no more, okay? It is a dangerous world out there for youth pastors, so please pray for us. But as I'm realizing this, I'm going to pray for you parents because you guys cannot escape it. There is one phrase, though, that has sort of up the ladder when it comes in terms of generations, not just Gen Z or Alpha or whatever, but millennials even say this phrase, and the phrase is, it's giving. Have you heard this phrase? Youth will see a person or a situation, and they'll be like, it's giving, and then they'll describe it. Since you asked, one student, when I was speaking one time, I was wearing joggers, and what I thought at the time was a very, very trendy sweatshirt. I thought I was just like the cool, young, hip youth pastor, and I was like, what would you guys say, and this is total setup, I was like, what would you guys say that I'm giving? And they're like, do you want us to be nice or honest? I said, I want you to leave. They said I was giving try-hard athletic wannabe. And there's nothing like a confidence booster from someone who they have no shame in lying, so they just tell you the truth. But what's funny about the statement of it's giving is that you can say it about someone you really know or just met. The phrase it's giving is based off of a current impression, vibe, everything it encapsulates about that person in that moment. And with us recently having an entire month about the person of Jesus, I'm curious, if you were put on the spot, would you be able to give a synopsis, to articulate what Jesus is giving as a person? Not what other Christians have claimed to express he gave, but you and your personal relationship with him. What would you say Jesus is giving? Do we even know what in the world Jesus was trying to give when he was here on earth by the life he lived, the way he spoke, and the way he interacted with people? I ask this because going into this new year, so many of you in this room, undoubtedly, you would give about anything for your current situation or struggle to change. And what Jesus gives us, it may not be exactly what we think we need, or what we want, but it is more than we could ever ask for. And by us looking at just 3 chapters today, we can see how Jesus responds to the storm or struggle that we're in. Now, what Jesus gives, a couple weeks ago, you may have caught Brian mention this in Christmas Eve. We actually refer to it every year. It's not only often misheard, but it's very much so misunderstood. Here's what I mean. Luke 1 and 2 are basically the chapters of Jesus' birth, and that's what we often read in the Christmas story. And in Luke 1, Zechariah is singing a song about his son, John the Baptist, who is to prepare the way for Jesus. And he's so expectant and ready for his son, John. He sings this whole song about him. But at the very end, he refers to Jesus as to what Jesus is going to be and what he is going to bring and give. And I want to see if you catch it. This is Luke 1:79. Zechariah sings, Jesus will shine on those living in darkness and in the shadow of death. He will shine on those living in darkness and in the shadow of death. He didn't say that he would rescue them from it. Didn't say he would keep it from happening, just that he would be there. Shine light, supposedly. And if we could be honest, looking back at how long, stressful, and anxiety-ridden 2024 was, am I the only one, or are you kind of tired of hearing about all the things Jesus can and should do, yet your lives are arguably more stressful than ever? According to a recent article, 43% of adults reported higher stress levels than the previous year. Stress is incredibly common. Anxiousness is always normalized. And feeling overwhelmed is simply the heartbeat of our day-to-day. If you're being honest, do you feel like Jesus is giving light on your stress and situation, or do you feel like you're very much so alone in it? And the real question I want to target today is this. What role does Jesus play, if any, in your anxiety, your situation, your storm, your struggle? I used to think my stress, my issues were so far from being touched by Jesus, and getting him to fix it or be involved was just not possible, because there's only 2 options. Either he cares or he doesn't. And if he did, he would do something about it to not happen. Because why would he do that to us, right? I, just like many of you, have experienced too many external situations, external storms outside of my control, that I internally have accepted that. And the disciples, his best friends, they not only thought this, but they experienced this firsthand. And so today, for the first Sunday morning of 2025, I want to do something a little unorthodox at church, which I know you're all game for because you're here and you have no choice, the doors are locked, okay? What we're going to do, we're going to have a good old-fashioned Bible study, okay? We're going to go through 3 chapters, and for anyone who's doing Bible in a year, 3 chapters in a day gets you there. So we're going to knock 3 of those out of the way right here, right now. But for real, I want to ask all of you just to stick with me, okay? Just stick with me. If you were able to see what God can do in 3 chapters, you will be so expectant and blown away by what he can do in the next 360 days. So if you have your Bible, you can turn to Mark 4. If you're lazy like me, you can go ahead and sit down. You're halfway there. And look at the screen. It's going to be chill, relaxed. Follow along. Mark 4:35, it says this. That day when evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, let us go over to the other side. Leaving the crowd behind him, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, Teacher, don't you care if we drown? Okay, so the disciples, they're in a boat, they're in a storm, they are fearing for their life, and what would you say Jesus is giving? Unreachable, not caring, preoccupied, not to be bothered with our storm and our struggle. How many of you felt like Jesus kind of slept on you in 2024? Something you went through. I mean, maybe you prayed, maybe you sought out after him, maybe you actually came to church consistently. You were really trying, yet you were also really struggling. See, the disciples don't just feel this, they just don't think this. They firsthand experience it when their life is actually at stake in a physical storm. Verse 39, let's keep reading. The disciples woke him and said to him, Teacher, don't you care if we drown? He got up, rebuked the wind and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" And they were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." The disciples had a very, very fair question. Don't you care if we die? Don't you care if we drown? And I want you to identify right now, personally for you, what is your version of that question? Jesus. Don't you care? Don't you care what I went through this past year? Don't you care about my health diagnosis? Don't you care about the path that my kids are on? Don't you care about my divorce? Don't you care about how I barely got through the very thing that almost strangled me to death this past year and I'm already experiencing it in 2025? Jesus, don't you care? And to make matters worse, how does Jesus answer the disciples? Does he? He kind of just hushes their question and he acknowledges the storm. He says, "Peace, quiet, be still, go back to sleep." First time I remember Jesus I felt him kind of like hush my storm or what I went through is that, believe it or not, there was some potential for this athletic try-hard wannabe. And a week into college, not a week into college, about a month into playing soccer at college, I remember it was just a simple practice. We were on turf, friggin' hate turf. But I was running, playing on my foot to open up. My ankle stayed, but my knee, my hip completely turned. And the next day I went to the doctor and he said I had what's called an unhappy triad, which is, that sounds great and encouraging. It's meniscus, ACL, and MCL just completely ruptured. I heard it before I felt it. It was one of those weird shock things. A week later, October 7th, I got surgery. I was devastated. And first semester of college, I had the one thing that I genuinely cared about just stripped away. I mean, I was going to a Christian school. I was reading the Bible every day. I was actually trying in my faith. And I felt like God was completely asleep in my storm as much as I was trying to be good. And it reminded me of Luke 1. I wanted to be encouraged by the fact that Jesus would shine light on my darkness and in my storm. But I actually want to show you how Luke 1 ends. Luke 1:79, it says this. It says that Jesus would shine on those living in darkness and in the shadow of death to guide our feet into the path of peace. Notice it didn't say the path to peace, but the path of peace. What I had to realize then, and what I'm wanting us to realize in 2025, is that when we come across stress and storms, seasons that feel like death, we need to understand that peace, the idea of it, is not a destination. It is not out there somewhere in a different circumstance. Like in the storm, get this. The presence of Jesus was more than available to the disciples, but guess what they chose to believe? They chose to believe that the power of their stress was greater than the peace of the one who could actually sleep through it. I think Jesus was trying to teach us something incredibly powerful, which is, if you can try to grasp this, as much as we think our external circumstances and storms dictate what's going on internally, like how we think and how we feel, it's exactly the opposite. Jesus wants us to know that our internal world actually dictates how we are in the uncontrollable storms that we experience. See, going into 2025, spoiler alert, I'm so sorry, you are not going to be able to control everything, let alone anything. And maybe you were never meant to. Maybe you should let go of control so you can actually have peace. Let peace have its place. And the reason I'm wanting us to understand this is because we are all individually at fault for a majority of our own stress that we place on ourselves, simply because we will always choose familiar chaos before we explore unfamiliar peace. We will go back to that relationship. We will stay in that terrible job. We will cheer for the same disappointing team again and again and again. God's not real. You're getting disappointed. But Jesus promises to bring peace in the middle of whatever you're going through. And so here's the thing. Jesus saw how these disciples responded to the storm externally, but the story was so much deeper because of the stress they were carrying internally. And Jesus knows that about us, that when we respond to something, when we respond to a storm, a struggle, something that's going on, he can put a Band-Aid over that in a second. But what he's really concerned about is not our external circumstances. Arguably, he's more concerned about our internal stress and the story that we're telling ourselves about him in it. And the truth is, he's never left us. He's close enough to be snoring. So I want to pose a question that we're going to circle back to in our Bible study. And the question is very simple. What in the world is the point of peace? What is the point of peace when we go through what we go through again and again and again, year after year? Okay, that was Mark 4. Going into Mark 5, I'm going to summarize this for you really quick. Jesus is walking into town with his disciples. After the first storm, Jesus keeps the disciples with him for a solid 24, 36-hour period. Walking into town, there's a demon-possessed man that comes to Jesus and says, "What are you going to do with me, Son of the Most High God?" The disciples witness this, okay? So Jesus acknowledges the demon, casts him out into a crowd of pigs, throws him into the sea. Read it. It's a thriller. You're going to love it. But basically, after that happens, Jesus says to the man that was previously demon-possessed, he says, "Don't follow me. Go tell your family how I've changed you, what's happened, so they can know who to follow." The disciples witness this. As soon as that happens, Jesus is then approached by a synagogue leader named Jairus. Jairus says that his daughter is dying. So Jesus appropriately responds, and he is on his way to healing this dying daughter. But in doing so, a crowd slowly starts to build around him. 30, 40, 50, 60 people are around him. And out of nowhere, a woman who's been bleeding for 12 years, along with everyone else, happens to touch him. And Jesus stops the entire crowd and says, "Who touched me?" The disciples are thinking, "Bro, what are you on?" Everyone is trying to get a glimpse and touch of you. But Jesus noticed something different in the woman that I want to propose. Okay? Jesus recognized something in the woman in Mark 5. Verse 26, it says this: "She had suffered a great deal." Again, she had been bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. What I love about the Bible, it is truly the most relatable historical piece of literature that shows us what happens when we bring our true, authentic, broken, stressed out, anxious-ridden selves to the feet of Jesus. Do you know why Jesus recognized her touch from everyone else? If I had to guess, he recognized someone who had tried everything, spent all her money, saw all the doctors, had every excuse not to believe because of her external situation. Yet she did not allow her external scene to dictate her internal story. She did not let her circumstances dictate her belief. And what Jesus was trying to teach the disciples in the storm, the day earlier, he saw in the willingness of the woman to step out of her stress and approach him in the middle of her storm and not only receive healing, but receive peace. If you read the story, his final words are, "Go in peace." It's so beautiful. Mark 5. The disciples witnessed this. The next chapter, Mark 6, it starts out with Jesus sending them out 2 by 2, not to be confused with Noah, but he literally says, "All right, disciples, you've experienced a lot, you've seen a lot, I want you to go." The disciples go and they start praying for people, healing people, experiencing all these good things. They go back, they tell Jesus of all the stories, and then they partake in one of the largest miracles ever, the feeding of the 5,000. Last service, I said, with just a few loaves of fish, all right? With a few loaves of bread and a few fish, okay? The disciples witnessed this. They not only witnessed it, but guess what? As the crowds are being multiplied on this massive hill, they see the chaos, they see the people. I don't remember the last massive crowd or concert you went to, but imagine just seeing that and knowing that they're waiting on you to do something. The disciples see that and tell Jesus, "We have to do something." They're going to be hungry. And they start freaking out because of what? Their external situation. So they start telling Jesus, "What are we going to do?" And one of my favorite responses from Jesus, he says, "You give them something to eat." He invites the disciples to be a part of a miracle despite their external stress. Despite what they're telling themselves externally, he says, I want you to change your internal story, and I want you to see what's possible. So the disciples interact with Jesus, and they have participation in one of the largest miracles ever. After this, Jesus is understandably tired. So he goes up on the mountain to pray, but you know what he says? After they experience everything, do you know what he tells the disciples to do? Mark 6:45, put it up. It says, immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida while he dismissed the crowd. Now remember to keep scope of everything that happened, not just in the past 2 chapters, but in the past 24 hours. The disciples just participated in a massive miracle. 1 chapter earlier, Mark 5, the disciples witnessed the bleeding woman being healed of her incurable disease. In the chapter before, they were fearing for their life in a crazy storm inside of a dinky little boat. Do you think the disciples wanted at any time to step in any boat anytime soon? And just 2 chapters later, what does Jesus say to do? Get back in the boat. Some of you may be fearful of what you're going to experience in 2025 because you barely made it through 2024. But looking at Jesus, you can see that your life was never meant to be free from problems, but rather promoted in peace amidst them. What I love about Jesus is that in the Bible is that we have 4 different gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all 4 different perspectives upon the life of Jesus. So when it comes to the storm and the stories of the woman and the feeding of the 5,000, we have those perspectives. They're next to each other the entire time, taking it in. But one of the coolest things is to compare and look and see the similarities and differences of it. So the first 2 chapters that we went through, Mark 4 and Mark 5, obviously that was in Mark. The story continues in Mark 6, but it's explained in greater detail in Matthew 14. And just so you can understand, I'm going to continue reading in Matthew 14, but it's the same story, different perspective. Does that make sense? 2 + 2 is 5? Cool. All right, just to show you real quick, if we can show the video, this is Mark 6 at the top, death of John the Baptist. It goes down all the way to Jesus feeds the 5,000, and then it goes down to Jesus walks on water, okay? Now we're going to look at Matthew 14, death of John the Baptist. Again, different perspective, same story. Jesus feeds the 5,000. Going all the way down till we have Jesus walking on water. YouVersion's a great app. If you look at your Bible, you compare. These are the same stories, different perspectives. So we're continuing with what we've read, just from a different perspective, okay? I'm only going to repeat myself 5,000 more times, don't worry. Going into Matthew 14. Here we go. Matthew 14:22. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side. Sound familiar? While he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. And later that night, he was there alone. And the boat was already a considerable distance from the land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid. Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on water, and came towards Jesus. But when Peter saw the wind and the waves, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, truly you are the Son of God. This is the disciples' second storm. And I've told some of you the story before, but a month to the date after my knee surgery, I remember feeling closer to God than ever before. I was doing all the right things. I was young, passionate. I'm still young. Passionate about faith, trying to not mess up or sin too much like every good college kid. But I remember driving with my brace on. I've told this story before. But a man from oncoming traffic fell asleep at the wheel, 55 miles an hour, hit me head on, okay? I had surgery on my left knee. The left side of the car was hit. This delayed my knee progress. This further deepened my pain. I missed months of school. You can take the picture down. I missed months of school. I finished my freshman year with a 1.83 GPA, and some of you were like, checks out. I genuinely was trying so hard. This was my Jesus don't you care moment. My second storm. Don't you care? I'm trying, I'm reading, I'm doing all the right stuff. I'm trying so hard, don't you care? And what's crazy is after my first storm, after my knee, my inability to function or get around, I experienced God more than I ever did before. Again, I was doing all the right things. I started a Bible study. I was intentional about asking my roommates to go to church. I only skipped 20% of my classes, doctor's note. I did eventually get a free Dean's List mug that I lost right after. But I was passionate about my faith, and it reminds me of the disciples after their first storm. They not only saw miracles, they performed miracles. And what is Jesus doing? He is sending them back into the storm. And with that, I have to ask the question, what's the point of peace? What in the world is the point of peace if all we're going to be doing is experiencing storm after storm? If I stand up here and promise you peace, that sounds great. But if life is going to just keep lifing, I'm not going to want to step in any boat anytime soon. And I know I'm not the only one. I used to see the first and second storm as completely individually separate events, but with you, I want to know the point of peace. And so what we're going to do is we're going to compare the first storm to the second storm. And we're going to look side by side what the disciples do and what Jesus says. And we're going to take notes within our Bible study, starting off the year strong, and you're going to see what peace actually looks like in the middle of a storm, okay? So I'm going to do the first storm and then the second storm. First slide, this is Mark 4:36. It says this. That day when evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, let's go over to the other side. Matthew 14:22, the second storm, immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side. Whatever you're going through, whatever you're in the middle of, if Jesus says you're going to the other side, yes, there's storm. Yes, it's chaos. There are wind, there are waves, there are people that you live with. They're a terrible breed. I want to get away from them. We can't escape them. We're going to get to the other side, okay? Mark 4:37. First storm, a furious squall came up and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Matthew 14, second storm, and the boat was already a considerable distance from the land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. These storms are so similar. It's only the 5th day of 2025 and you're like, I barely made it through 2024. How in the world am I going to make it through? Please understand, your response to your storm dictates Jesus' response to you. Your response to your storm and what you're going through dictates his response to you. Here's what I mean. Mark 4:39, first storm. He got up, he rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, quiet, be still. Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. Second storm, Matthew 14. Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. If you spend 2025 crying, God, why is this happening? Why me? Why is this happening again? How am I supposed to do this? Complain, why? Guess what? God's going to be able to say, quiet, peace, be still. He'll put a Band-Aid over your external situation potentially. But if instead of asking why, if you ask, God, I'm struggling through this again. Yes, there's wind. Yes, there's waves. Yes, I'm struggling. Yes, it's difficult. But if that's you, God, if it's really you, tell me to walk out on the water. And if you actually keep your perspective on the person and the peace, you will hear him close enough to hear him say, come, walk to me, and you will find peace in the middle of your storm. Your response to your storm and your situation dictates his response to you. But at the last one, Mark 4:40, first storm, he said to his disciples, why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? In second storm, Matthew 14, immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You have little faith. He said, why did you doubt? And I want you all to see all of this, 2 separate storms with the same people, eerily similar responses from Jesus. What does this show us? What if the point of Jesus and what if the purpose of peace is not to eliminate the storms, but to give you courage to meet God in the middle of it? Not to blame him, not to run away, not to say he's giving, he could care less, but to pursue him in the middle of your storm. And in doing so, you may just have the miracle you've been waiting for. Because what I see Jesus doing with the disciples, and please hear the heart behind this, Jesus will intentionally take you back or allow you to re-experience what used to scare you to see if you've actually grown. Like I said, he may put a Band-Aid over your situation and fix that, but what good is, how many of you know if your current situation right now, if God were to just heal it done, how long would it take for you to be a stressful ball of mess again? Not that long, right? Because it's just something internally about our story. Jesus is wanting to provide peace to our story so that we can provide it to our scene. So if in 2025, if you experience a similar storm that you did last year, does that mean Jesus isn't real? Where was Jesus in Mark 4? He was in the boat. Where was he in Matthew 14? 50 feet away. He may feel further, but he's just as much with you. Just because you experience stress or anxiety or depression does not mean that Jesus is with you. He wants you to see that peace actually gives you the opportunity to strangle the storm that you once thought you would drown in. So in summary, I want to give you 4 points. I was going to say 4 punching points of peace. But I just want to give you 4 points of peace to carry into this next year, okay? I've kind of already said these, but to just put sort of like a thumbnail on it, easy to remember. Number 1, Jesus is with you in the storm. He is with you. Whether he's in the boat or 50 feet away, he is with you. Regardless, the question is, will you allow his peace to be greater than your storm? Because number 2, whatever it is you're going through, your storm is not your story. Your storm is not your story. He has things waiting for you on the other side like he promised. And as 2025 pans out and everybody in your social circle is looking for different options and different providers of peace that offer cheap, substances and whatever that may look like for you, please understand what peace is. More importantly, what peace is not. Peace is not perfection. Peace is not a place. Peace is not the absence of problems. Peace is a person, Jesus. Nothing else, Jesus. Last but not least, the final nail in the coffin. This is the one I want you to write down. Jesus wants to bring peace internally. so that you can bring it externally. 2025 is going to be the year where we as believers do not react to situations because we're stressed out. But rather, I did that last service, but rather we respond. But rather, we respond by bringing internal peace to our external situations. If it could all be summed up, John 16:33, Jesus himself said this. Before I share this verse, you may have heard it before. I don't like this verse because it doesn't solve anything, but it provides something. John 16:33, it says, I have told you these things so that in me you may have not solutions, but peace. In this world, you will have trouble, but take heart, I've overcome the world. Take heart, I've overcome the world. Last but not least, take heart. Take heart is the biblical, over-spiritualized way of saying this. Can everyone look? Don't freak out. Don't freak out. 2025 happens, don't freak out. You can have urgency and not freak out. You can respond and not freak out. How can we as a people proclaim a God of peace and love and mercy and grace and sovereignty and control and just being the one above it all? Yet when we get a flat tire, God's not real. Like we are so quick to throw away the very thing that we want to hold on to. Guess what? Don't freak out. Don't freak out. Don't freak out. You want me to say it again? Don't freak out. Just don't freak out. You are showing God who you believe has more control, just like the disciples in the storm. They believed the power of their stress was greater than the one who had the peace to sleep through their storm. And maybe God's trying to show you that what you're stressing out about isn't worth losing sleep over. You all got a lot of beauty sleep today, but some of you could use some more, okay? Here's the thing. We are all going to suffer. It's inevitable. Like he said, we're gonna have trouble. We're all gonna suffer, but as disciples of Jesus, why don't we suffer smarter? By not asking and complaining, God, why this again? Why you, why me? But saying, God, this is tough, but if it's you, let me know and I will walk to you in the middle of it. That's what we were made to do. And that's what 2025 can look like if you allow peace to have its place. Let's pray. God, we love you. And as tough as it may feel, God, we thank you for the storms because they provide an opportunity to experience peace. God, I hope that we understand that peace is not about Zen, finding the vibes and having nothing happen. God, peace, true peace is when everything is happening, yet our perspective is on the person of Jesus. And I pray that 2025, our perspective would be fixed and the person of Jesus would be more real than ever because we did not take our eyes off him once, regardless of the storm, regardless of the situation. We love you. We thank you for the strength to do this. In Jesus' name, amen.